Diaries. You got that. Who this? Hey, starting over. Who this ain't over? Corazón on bliss. Café en la mañana, dreams en la mente. Glow up, baby, tú eres suficiente. Latina Love Diaries. Press play on mi vida.
Hi, everyone. Hi, and welcome to the Latina Love Diaries, Season 2, Episode 12. I'm your host, Carolina, and today we have a very, very special guest. We have a very successful attorney and renowned author, Shelly Cruz. Shelly, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here and chat with you today.
We're very happy to have you. To start off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and what led you to become an attorney?
Sure. So I grew up just outside of Boston in a town called Newton, in the 80s. And my mother is from Argentina and my father was from Puerto Rico. And I grew up in a very much white American place. I think we were like one of 5 Latino families. Um, and it was not always, I'm 6 feet tall. I became 6 feet tall when I was 12 or 12 on the cusp of 13, but, and it was all, I had this crazy frizzy hair and I was tall and I had this super Latina name. So it wasn't always easy. My parents, we spoke Spanish at home and my mother predominantly spoke Spanish. Like her English was very, I guess they call it broken English, right?
My parents.
Well, I always remember, I think I was like 12 or 13. She had gotten into a car accident. And there was my mom used to be a housekeeper. She used to clean houses. And one of the ladies she worked for was like, oh, my friend's a lawyer and I'm going to send him. And, you got into this car accident. So he came to the house. And I remember sitting at my dining room table and I was helping translate, so she could understand. And my father spoke English, but he also needed a little bit of help. And I remember talking to that lawyer and I was just like fascinated. I was just like looking at him and in awe of everything. And so I was like, what's it like to be a lawyer? Tell me about lawyer life and tell me about, the law. And he said to me, I love being a lawyer. I like to help people and the law lives, breathes. And I never forgot that. So ever since that experience, I sort of thought about being a lawyer. And then everybody's like, I'm feisty and I argue a lot. So everybody's like, oh, you're going to be a good lawyer. So, eventually I went to law school. I think I was 32 when I started law school. And I went at night and, I wavered a little bit. Like initially I was like, oh, I'm not sure because I worked as a paralegal and I didn't really like lawyers that I met. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the lawyer that everybody else that I've met is not, right? Sort of in line of who I am and my personality. And so everybody who works with me in my law firm, tells me like, wow, I mean, I know you're a lawyer, but it's not like, I don't feel like you're a lawyer because you make it sound so easy and I talk to you and you make me feel so comfortable. So I really strive to be just an average person who's helping you understand the legal complexities of the courtroom. I'm a family lawyer, so it's, and a business lawyer. So in the realm of those areas of law. And a driving force is I want to be a lawyer that I would have wanted my parents to hire.
Yeah.
So that's kind of.
So that's an incredible story, really. I love that. I myself come from, immigrant parents who came from Colombia. We spoke Spanish at home, still do speak Spanish to my kids at home. They speak English as well, but my parents don't. Well, my dad's no longer with us, but my mom speaks still, the broken English. And so it is very interesting. I love that story. What's it feel like to be a Latina woman in this position of power where you're constantly moving kind of in this masculine energy in this high pressure situation? And how do you shift from that, into your feminine energy?
It was I live in Miami now. And I moved to Miami to be more among Latinos because I felt I was really lacking that Latino community in Boston.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I could fully, truly be my full Latina self in Boston. It was the 90s, so it's a little bit different now. And so I find that being very much Latina here in South Florida is a very natural and easy thing because there's such a huge, huge Latino population. So it makes it a little bit easier to be my authentic self. And then within the realm of the legal field, it's predominantly masculine. There's a lot of masculine energy,
Yeah.
but I'm very, I guess, imposing. I'm very strong when I have to be, and I don't let them intimidate me. I'm six, like I said, I'm 6 feet tall. So
Mhm.
sometimes I wear heels to sort of make them feel some type of way.
That.
And it usually works, and I don't have to say anything. I don't have to do anything. And I tend to put on like this suit of armor, like I put on my face, and it's not that I'm doing anything specific. Like I transform in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now I'm walking into the courthouse. Now I'm doing this thing. And it's the energy that I put off that people are like, oh, okay, gotcha. Right. So I sort of do that to try to protect my inner self from the legal world that can get ugly sometimes. And, but at the same time, I feel like I'm ultra feminine, I'm always wearing my lipstick and I always have on my earrings and, I wear my dresses and my suits and very much with my feminine flair and my colors. And so there's a lot of authenticity laced into my lawyer brand, right? I always say being a lawyer is just my job.
Yeah.
It's not who I am. So, and I always try to remember that because I meet a lot of lawyers and I'm like, you got to separate the two, right? Because otherwise it sort of, it invades your mental space. So
Yeah, it's an excellent point. You're right. And then it's not easy to kind of move in between these two worlds where you do, still maintain that femininity. So, that's great that you're able to do so fluidly. It's not something that comes easy to everyone. And
I mean, I don't think it always came easy. I think it's something I grew into. I'll be 49 this year. So I think age sort of helps with that too, because you learn as you grow and you experience all of these other things as you're coming of age and, all the good and the bad and the ugly and everything in between. Right. So I feel like now it's a lot easier because now I sort of, I do what I want when I want. And if you don't like it, then that's a you problem. That's not a me problem because I'm not disrespecting anybody and I'm not out of line. Right. I'm just myself. Right. So if somebody has issues with that, that's nothing to do with me. But I wasn't always like that. Right.
yeah,
So it takes a long time to get here. My stepdaughter is 26 and she just became a lawyer like 4 months ago. And I try to teach her all these things. And she's like, but how do you do it? And I was like, you just have to sort of experience it. And you have to go through these things and you have to let all of the negative happen. 'Cause not in a way that it's going to be bad, but like you have to experience these things in order to be like, oh, I can't let that happen again.
yeah,
I have to set a boundary. I have to speak a certain way, right? Because in my experience, the best lessons are the hardest learned.
that's so true. I agree with that statement. Unfortunately, we do tend to lose
Unfortunately, yeah.
yeah. And being an attorney and going from that, what was the spark that led you to start writing romance novels? What led to that?
I've always been a romance reader, like as far back as I can remember. When I was a kid, I'd go to the library every week, as a young adult as a kid, and maybe some inappropriate books when I was in my teens. But I've always just loved romance. It's in everything and it's everywhere. And, love and relationships is like the foundation of life, right? Whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship. And so I always had these stories like living in my head, but I never really had time. And then so I wrote my first book during COVID because the only thing we all had during COVID was time. So I started writing. I was like, I don't know if I can really do it because it's literally the complete opposite
Yeah.
of what I do for work, right? As a lawyer, it's like fact, fact, fact,
Hmm.
fact, law, fact. There's like no fluff. So I thought I was going to struggle with writing all of these characters and these creations and these descriptions, which is so like what I call fluff.
Yeah.
In legal writing, fluff. And in fiction writing, it's just writing.
You're building a
Right. So, right. And so it came a lot easier than I anticipated. And I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a nice break from some of the heavy stuff that I do at work. So, I do it in my spare time, which is not a lot, but I do it, which is why my last book took me 3 years to publish. But um, I really enjoy it. You know, Work sparks a lot of ideas for the drama. that we find in the novels.
Okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to check one of these out. Okay, so are these mostly romance novels?
Yes. So that I have 3 novels published. My debut novel that I wrote during COVID is called 9 Years Gone. It's a second chance romance with a miscommunication and secrets trope. My second novel, and that first book is set in Boston, which is where I was born and raised. My second novel is called Amor in the 305. It's set in Miami, which is where I live. 305 is the area code there. And this one is, my first book is my book baby. It's like, what ventured me into writing. This second novel is my husband's Cuban, and he fled Cuba on a homemade raft with his brother and 6 friends. And we travel a lot, and he speaks English with a very thick accent. And so inevitably, the conversation is always, "Where are you from? Oh, you have an accent. Oh, Cuba." Like that whole story of how he left Cuba and everything that goes with it. So I was like, I want to write that story, and I want to wrap it up in a romance because it's not a pretty story.
Mhm.
It's tragic and sad, right? But our, lives generally have tragedy and sadness in them. But even amongst the tragedy and the sadness, people still love, they still find, these beautiful things that come in life. So I wanted to write that story wrapped up in a romance because I think it's an important story for people to know. So that's why I wrote that. And then, so there's a lot of personal elements in that book. That was probably the hardest book to write because of the personal connections. And then my last one that released just about a month ago on February 24th is a reggaeton rock star. So think Bad Bunny, that kind of energy where it's an age gap where she's older. She's newly divorced. She gets a divorce because her husband has betrayed her. And so she's a divorce lawyer who's getting divorced and her, life is falling apart. And she sets out to, have this one night stand just start like sparking her new single life after 2 years in the divorce process. And it's a failed one night stand. But she doesn't know who he is. And when she finds out who he is, she's like, not only am I older, but he's this super mega reggaeton rock star who like makes thousands of women swoon as he sings.
Yeah,
Right? That's the last one. It's called Staying for La Lluvia. It's also set in Miami.
I like that one. I mean, I
Um,
think
and
that sounds really good and interesting.
yeah, it's pretty good. Um, and just like everything, the more you do it, the more you improve. I feel like this is my strongest book. It's my best writing yet. There's been a lot of good feedback. There's some good reviews. I think my main male character, Javier, is quite swoon worthy. He's 10 years her junior. So there's a lot of good stuff in that book.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to reading it. Very interesting, and I'll post links about it when we post about the episode on Instagram. Okay, and then, going back a little bit into your work, even as an attorney and as a writer, as an attorney, you're very familiar with how you build a case and what goes into that. And as an author, you're very familiar in how to build a world and what goes into that. What do you think, in your experience, especially being an attorney in the position that you're in, how do you think that we as women often build cases against our own happiness just based on our past trauma, not even on real actual evidence?
I think so, a lot of times we try to convince ourselves that the things that we've been through are our own fault. We're there and we experience it because we allowed it to happen. We allowed people to do these things to us. We allowed the hurt to continue. And I don't think that those narratives are accurate, right? I myself was married very young. My ex-husband was a domestic abuse person, and I never wanted to be there. It just sort of happens, right? You don't go on a first date and this person is a terrible human, because if there's a terrible human on your first date, then there's not going to be a second date.
Yeah.
How about this person who's charming and nice and all of the things that check the boxes, right? And then when the comfort levels and all of these things sort of fall into place, then sort of the true colors start to come out, right? And it happens every day to everyone, as it happened to me as a young woman. It took me years to sort of see what my friends were just telling me. And even as my friends were telling me and all of these things, I was like, no, like you make excuses for it.
Yeah.
Um, and then whatever, there's always an event that something, and it's sort of like an eye-opening moment that it sort of clicks. And I see it now as a lawyer because a lot of my clients are domestic abuse survivors. right? And I hear the narratives that they tell you, and I hear the self-doubt and the self-blame for putting themselves, as they say, in these positions. And I always try to tell them a little bit of my personal story to get them to understand, like, we never choose these things, right? You don't fall in love with these people. It just so happens. And when you find yourself there, now you're like, well, how do I get out? So once these women overcome these situations and they start over, I think there has to be a mind shift set um that needs to happen. Sometimes it's a difficult thing to do, right? And so in the book, betrayed by the last book I wrote, Staying for La Lluvia, she's betrayed by her ex-husband who cheats on her or whatever. And the way she sort of gets herself across that, threshold that's holding her back in her mind is she's going to therapy, right? I'm a very big proponent of therapy because oftentimes, not sometimes, we are our own biggest hurdles,
Yeah.
right? We stop ourselves, limit ourselves. It's the words that we use. It's the way that we talk to ourselves about ourselves. And all of that limiting behavior is it's inside of us, and we have to figure out, well, how do we get past that? So in the book I wrote it, she goes to therapy, she learns a lot of these things in therapy. And there's some therapy sessions that she's going through to help her learn some of these, to, I guess, remove the barriers that she creates in her mind. Like, you question everything you over. So I think we're all worthy of the happily ever after. And happily ever after, of course, in a romance novel is you're in a relationship, but you don't have to be. Like, you have to be happy with yourself. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to do your own thing. And then I feel like once you reconnect with yourself, then all of these other things sort of come and attract to you. I think it's the most important relationship you can have in your life is the one you have with yourself.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. In my case, I think it took me a long time to go from warrior mode. I was always in warrior mode. I feel like the whole time I was in warrior mode because I was the main provider in the household and I was the main person that was holding everything together for the kids. And so even years after the divorce, I stayed in that warrior mode and I kind of lived there the entire time until I would say about a couple of months ago. It took me this whole time to kind of embrace my femininity again and realize the power that there is in that, you know?
Yeah. And I don't think you do it intentionally. It's like a day in and day out. You're there. You're a provider. You're giving and you're caring and you're taking care of kids or parents or siblings or whoever it is that you're caring for. And you don't intentionally not think about yourself or not care for yourself because in your mind you're like, well, I'm providing and I'm doing all these things, so everybody else is okay, then I'm okay too.
Yeah,
Right? So it's very easy for us to put ourselves last. Oh, and I'll do that for myself tomorrow.
it does.
And then tomorrow becomes next week, and then it becomes next month.
You're absolutely right. It does become like that. Unfortunately, it does take that mind shift, like you said, when you go from getting that divorce to then living your new life. It does. And I do also believe it does require therapy. It's not an easy shift to make. And a lot of times, if you don't go to therapy and if you don't get some help recognizing the behaviors that allow this situation to happen in the first place, then you'll be more than likely to repeat the same scenario because you won't have healed from whatever trauma it was that allowed this to happen. Not saying that we as women are causing it to happen or anything, but we do allow our boundaries to be crossed. And we do allow certain behaviors that we normally wouldn't allow from other people in our lives. But for some reason, from this person who's supposed to love us the most or whatever, we tend to allow more behaviors than we would from anybody else. And so I do think that it does take therapy and it does take definitely a mind shift to go from that and to be able to start over and live a new life. And if you don't deal with that trauma, then the next person that you go out with is likely to repeat that same pattern. And that's likely to continue until you do address whatever was the initial issue that allowed you to think that it was okay for you to be treated this way, because
Right. And setting boundaries is a really difficult thing to do.
it is. It was super hard for me, super hard.
But once you do it, I think the first time setting a boundary is the most difficult because we're like, well, if I set this boundary, you're thinking about how it's going to affect everybody else. But the way you should think about it is, if I set this boundary, how's it going to make me feel? How am I going to react if I set this boundary? And boundaries are to protect yourself. It's not a bad thing. And if you're protecting yourself, and people almost always respect a boundary that's set, almost always, right? And if you set it, people are like, oh, this boundary's here and I'm not going to cross that line. But when you set a boundary and you're like, oh, it's not a firm boundary, it's a maybe boundary, people will always test how far can I push it. So I'm a very big firm believer in set the boundary, and if it's whatever that boundary is for you, you make it firm and you don't allow anybody to cross it, because that's protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And there is nothing wrong with doing that. It's very empowering. The first time is the hardest. Once you do it, you're like, that feels really great.
You're right. You're right. It was extremely hard for me to learn how to set boundaries, and that's something I had to learn while I was in the middle of my separation and then divorce, just to be able to kind of maintain my sanity and eventually my safe space and a safe space for my children. So that was something that it didn't come easy to me. I needed a therapist assistance in order to be able to recognize that, number one, I didn't even have boundaries. I didn't even have boundaries, number one. And number two, learning how to set them and then enforce them. So that was not something easy for me.
Yeah.
And then, going,
Well, I'm glad you were able to get to the point of setting the boundaries and you finally crossed that barrier,
yeah,
because there's like a level of almost like freedom that you feel when you finally set the boundary for yourself and you have everybody respect you, and you're like, wow, it feels really great. There's a level of, I don't know, satisfaction or something, I guess is a good way to say it.
you're right. And then I also have a young daughter, she's 6, and teaching her from now the importance of having boundaries and
Yeah.
not letting people cross them. And it's something that I've been going with her now because nobody did that with me. Nobody talked to me about boundaries. There are no boundaries in a Latino household.
Right. There's no boundaries in the Latino household. That is a very true statement.
Yeah, they'll talk to you anywhere. They'll go in your room. Nobody cares.
And they'll say anything. So in my last book, in Staying for La Julia, she's a Latina. She's from Argentina in the book, and she has this very complicated relationship with her mother, because her mother is very much a Latina mom who is judgmental and speaks to her in certain ways. And a lot of the readers were like, I connected with that. I felt that. I saw myself in that dynamic, because it's a very, very different relationship. Like I said, growing up in Boston, most of my friends were white Americans, and their moms were very different than my mom. Right. So I wanted to really highlight that mother-daughter Latina relationship in this book, because growing up with Latino parents it's a dynamic in and of itself that makes situations a lot more sometimes.
Absolutely right. And in keeping in topic with your books, what are the happily ever afters like in your books? So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it looks like at the end? Do they end on that happily ever after note? And how do you think that women today
Well, they do, because they're romance.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, so they're happily ever afters. They end, the girl gets the guy, everybody's happy at the end.
Right. So, but there's drama, they're
Yeah, to get
messy,
there is not
there's real life. Right. There's real life emotions. I like to write, because sure, happily ever afters, we think of Cinderella and like all these Disney movies or whatever, but there's a lot of messy in real life. And just because it's messy, and just because there's trauma in the past and all of these things, it doesn't mean like, well, all of that happened, so now I can't also be happy. You know, it so I like to write stories that people can connect to, that feel realistic, but also just because of you're experiencing these things, you can also experience the love of a relationship. And sometimes it's a little bit harder to get there, and than others. Ultimately, the books, yes, they end in a happily ever after because they're considered romance novels. If That's like, I think, the primary thing when you write romance, that it has to end in either a happy for now or a happily ever after.
Yeah. Okay. And as far as these happily ever afters, how do you think that women can go about manifesting these in real life? Or is this just a story we were sold?
I think it goes back to what we were saying a little while ago. I think you have to have a solid relationship with yourself first. And if you can do that, sort of the abundance comes afterwards. I know when I was younger, I didn't really think about the relationship with myself and I thought more about the relationship with others. And I always felt it like a sort of disconnect. And I didn't like to be alone and I didn't like to do things on my own. As I grow older and I sort of shifted and I started like thinking about more about my own feelings and what I liked and what I don't like. And, I love being alone now. I love doing things by myself. And I think once a woman can really understand herself. What do you like? What don't you like? What are your boundaries? What do you really enjoy? What do you want no part of? Like, what is your pro and con list for yourself? If you can do that, you sort of and I guess it's like a good ways to say it is like you're comfortable in your own skin. Doesn't matter who you're with or where you are or what you're doing. You know, you're going to just be okay because you know who you are, what you're like, what you don't, what you're worth. So once you get to that level, I feel like that sort of just everything else just sort of attracts to you. I believe a lot in like that law of attraction and like the universe is going to give you things in abundance, not necessarily because you're looking for them, but
Because you're vibrating it.
you care for yourself and yeah. And it just sort of happens in a natural way. Are we sold happily ever afters? Yeah, of course we are. But, you know, my husband is, I give this as a good example. Like I had left my ex-husband and I was single for like a year and a half ish, maybe. And I was like, I want nothing to do with anybody. And in that moment is when I met my now husband. That was 24 years ago, right? So it can happen, right? But I'm very big on take care of yourself, think about yourself, put yourself first. Everything else comes after.
I think it's so interesting that you said that, because I always say I wasn't used to going out alone. I had to kind of learn to go out alone again after, being married and being a mom for so many years. And I had, done some traveling. I had started coming to California. If you're a listener of the podcast, uh, I had these trips that I would come out here, and see, this man. And, I had these adventures, but again, I wasn't exactly alone. It wasn't until this past weekend I took a trip alone to San Diego and I just took myself out to explore alone all day. And I was alone and I took myself out to eat. I started, at a nice restaurant overlooking the ocean. And I'm sitting there and I'm eating and throughout the day, I'm doing all these things like whatever I wanted to do, bookstore shopping, a museum, whatever I wanted to do on that whim, I just did it. It was a really, really incredible day. And as the day wore on, I was like, you know what? It's not that I'm uncomfortable alone because I'm really comfortable with myself. It's just that I'm not used to going out without kids and physically being alone. And so, but it made me realize,
Right.
oh no, I like myself. This is great. I love being able to choose where I want to go. It was really nice kind of being alone with my
Yeah.
thoughts, not having anybody kind of talking to me and just being able to journal or read a book, go to a museum, stand in front of a painting and just stare at it because I wanted to, sit in a park, like whatever I wanted to do, I did it. I went to a crystal shop and so I did all these things and I've been doing stuff here and I've been taking myself out to eat, but this was the first time I really went out alone all day. And I was just like, you know what? This is
Yeah.
nice. And I like me. I'm great company. I just don't do it enough. And so I'm not used to
Right.
the physical act of going out alone, but I'm great with my own company. So I'm gonna keep doing that every single month and just keep taking like one day where I'm just doing a day trip by myself and going out alone and going to a museum, going out to eat, doing whatever I want to do. But I do think that you're right about
Yeah,
that.
no, there's a level of there's a level of sort of I don't know if freedom is the right word, but there's this level of sort of inner peace that comes with whether you're in a park or you're sitting on a beach or you're sitting in a restaurant or it doesn't matter. You're in a bookshop or at the library. You're just there and there's this autonomy that comes with it. It's like I do what I want when I want. Nobody's gonna intrude into my thoughts. Nobody's gonna bother me. I can read, I can eat, I can sleep, whatever the choice is. There's a level of sort of, I don't know, like this tranquility that comes with that. Like, just gonna do it. And Nobody's going to tell me otherwise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is very free. I would agree with you. It is very freeing. There is something very liberating about realizing that, you've gotten to a place where you love yourself. You're comfortable with who you are. You love the life you're building. And it gives you this, it's like a sense of peace and a sense of also of excitement for what's happening and the life
Yeah.
that's slowly being built around you. It's really, really incredible. And so you do talk to a lot of divorced women in your field. What is something that you would say or you would give advice to a woman who is just starting and thinking about possibly she does need to get a divorce and she's afraid? What would be the very first piece of advice as an attorney that you would give to a woman that is in that position where she knows she's got to get a divorce, but she's afraid to start the process?
I mean, it really depends. Like, I hate that as a lawyer, I always say it depends, but it depends. So I speak to a lot of women who call me. They're like, and they have to schedule. Sometimes they have to like do it during the day when their kids are at school and they have to go to a library, right? So the circumstances that an individual is in determines that, right? A lot of the times, some of the questions I have to ask, like, are you in a safe place right now? Is it safe? Right. So if safety is an issue, then the conversation is very different than if safety is not an issue. Right. So for the purposes of the podcast, I'll say if I'm talking to a woman and safety is not an issue. Okay. And maybe they're just, the marriage is not doing well for any of the reasons that marriages don't go well. I talk to them about like, well, do you work or do you make independent money? Do you rely on your spouse to pay for everything? Because if you do and you don't have your independent money, then your strategies are going to be a lot different than if you have a job and you make your own money and you have an independent paycheck. So like, I always tell people you need to make a plan. You don't have to share the plan. And sometimes the plan is, okay, I know that first I have to start saving money. And if you don't have your independent money, then you save money by a little bit extra when you go to the supermarket or when you go to, like a CVS or something. So the plan is that's how you start saving money. Maybe you talk to a friend, a family member who is somebody you can trust with no questions asked, right? And maybe that's a person who's going to help you transition. But I think you have to start. I always talk to the women and I say, you have to have a plan, so let's talk about like your financial circumstances, right? Because kids or no kids, safety or no safety, financial situation is almost the driving force of what keeps people from taking that step. Oh, I
Yeah.
don't have enough money to move out. I can't pay for an apartment bill. Oh, I can't afford this on my own. Because really, when you're getting a divorce, everybody's starting at the bottom. It's really great people in a terrible place. So sometimes you have to sleep on a couch at a friend's house. If you have no friends and you have no family and there's, domestic issues, there's a lot of great, great shelters. They're not ideal, but they're safe. They're a place where you're going to have a bed. They're going to help you get sort of transition. There's a lot of organizations. So, I think you have to start with a plan and you have to speak to a trusted person. And if a trusted person doesn't exist in your personal life, there's organizations like here in South Florida, there's Women in Distress. That's a great organization. There's No More Tears USA. That's a great organization. So sometimes it's a church, sometimes it's a library, sometimes it's a community center. So you find that person that you can trust with the plan that you're going to set out for yourself and you start thinking about it. And if you're worried about people looking at your phone or your email, then, you don't write those things in your phone. You don't write
Yeah.
them in your email. Maybe you go to the library and you open a new Gmail account that's not associated, that you never open on your phone. You only read it when you're at the library. Right? So there's a lot of different things that I would say,
It's very
but I
smart.
would ask questions specifically of the situation that they find themselves in today. And whatever situation that is, that's going to sort of drive the conversation of where we go. But it'll always start with some type of plan. And sometimes the plan is going to take months, take a while, In my own
Yeah.
experience, when I was young and I decided to leave my ex-husband, from the date that I decided I was going to do it until the day I did it was like 9 months.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not an
I
overnight
think
decision. And that's okay.
it took me like a year and a
That's
half.
okay. Yeah, and it's okay that it takes you 9 months, a year and a half, 2 years, right? But in your mind, you have this plan unfolding and you're doing what's necessary to get you there to the day that it's time, right? So yeah, I mean that those are probably a lot more in-depth conversations that make it a little bit more difficult to give like generalized ideas here.
But that is
But
some great advice.
look, sometimes you want to talk to a lawyer to just get your what are my rights? And a lot of lawyers will talk to you and they'll give you some information. And now with that knowledge, you can go and create your plan for moving forward.
I love that. And I do think it is important to start with that plan. I myself didn't really have anybody to talk to. I think we cover so many things up and we don't want people to hate the person we're with. So we don't say things. And then I think when it comes to the point that you're going to leave, then you feel embarrassed all of a sudden saying, oh, well, guess what? This person you thought was so amazing, it turns out they're not so amazing. And these are the things that I've been hiding. And you're kind of embarrassed to say that. So I didn't. And so I don't like, I had my cousin who I talked to, and we kind of got each other through our divorces. But really, there was nobody else while I was in it that I was able to talk to like that. And I think had I been able to be more open and trust some of my friends and and it was a me issue. It's not like they couldn't be trusted. It was a me thing. Had I been able to be more open, probably would have left sooner because they would have been like, what are you talking about? This is happening. This is not good. They would
Right.
have told me something, but because I was so covering up and trying to maintain this, we're a great family thing, I never said anything. And then when I could have said something, I was already embarrassed. So I didn't really start
Yeah.
to talk about it until after the divorce.
Yeah. And I always feel like that is a common thing that women say, oh, I'm embarrassed to share. And my advice is you shouldn't feel embarrassed. It's not a reflection of who you are. It's a situation that you find yourself in that anybody can find themselves in. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But I am very aware that asking for help is a really difficult thing for people to do. But almost certainly there's somebody in your life that you can trust and you can ask help from. And if not, there's organizations that can help.
Yeah. And I would say
And
to
there's
anybody,
never,
yeah, I think anybody listening that's in that situation, if you don't have somebody, reach out to organizations. I wish I would have. Reach out to anybody that you really trust. But if there is nobody that you trust, don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed. They don't care. They're not going to care for years from now anyway. And if you don't have anybody you can trust, definitely reach out to an organization. We're getting to the end of our podcast here. Why don't you tell us again the title of your three books and where readers can get them?
so my books are available across all platforms. So you can get them on Amazon or in paperback form or barnesandnobles.com, not the physical stores for paperbacks or ebooks. You can read them on Kindle or Apple or Google Play. You can request them from your library because they're made available. This is something I learned when I published that if your local library doesn't carry a book, you can request them to get it for you. I didn't know that. So if your library doesn't have a book that you want to read, whether mine or somebody else's, you can ask them, hey, can you get this book? They usually check and might take them several weeks, but you can make the request and they usually get it. Books are Shelly Cruz is my author name. And the title of the first one is 9 Years Gone. The title of the second one is Amor and the 305. And the title of the third one is Staying for La Lluvia. And they are spicy, angsty, emotional romance novels.
You know what? It sounds just like what I need to read right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get one today and I'm going to read that first one. I can't wait. I'll let you know how it is and I'll post again. I'll post the links when I post about the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story and your knowledge with us. It's really valuable. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Um, it's always nice to sit and talk and get to know people and sort of connect through the love of reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so great talking to you. And for everyone listening, again, remember that this is your life. So make it whatever it is that you want it to be. Thank you so much, everyone.